My name is Patty Trackman, and the title of my presentation is Irish 49ers, the Irish in the Gold Rush. This is my exploration of the experience of the Irish during the California Gold Rush. I wanted to look at how they fared and how their experiences might have been different from those of other ethnic groups. My presentation was first done in May 2018 for a roundtable group that meets monthly at the United Irish Cultural Center in San Francisco. Take a look at this picture and notice how the Asian miners are on one side of the sluice and the Caucasians are on the other. It's very telling. I love this poem. It was published in the newspaper Alta California, July 19th, 1849. I am sitting on the stile, Mary, away up in the mines, a-looking out for lumps of gold, and pockets all I finds. But the lumps I find is precious small, and very few at that, and I feel that I have been, Mary, a most almighty flat. If you look at this grizzled old face, who may be Irish, I'm not sure, you can see the weariness and the hardship that these miners faced out in the gold mines. This timeline illustrates the close sequence of events surrounding the gold rush. In the space of only 4 years, 1846 to 1850, California went from a territory of Mexico to a possession of the United States and then statehood. In between, we see the peak of the Irish famine in 1847 and the discovery of gold in 1848. I believe these events and their narrow time frame contributed to the experience of Irish and their success at assimilation in California. The news of the discovery of gold in Northern California and the unfolding story there was covered by Irish newspapers. This piece is from the Cork Examiner, February 1849. Provisions are very scarce, and to obtain them many murders have been committed, or the purchase of them at exorbitant prices has indirectly but eventually led to murder. One story relating to an affair of this kind may deserve a place here. A man who had what is called a good hole had been digging incessantly for 2 days when he was accosted by one carrying a bucket containing food of some kind. The whole of this the digger purchased for about $100 in virgin gold, and while devouring it, the man who had sold the provisions took possession of the whole. After finishing his repast, the gold hunter ordered the fellow out, but on his positively refusing to come, knocked his brains out with a pickaxe, took from his pockets the virgin gold that had purchased a meal, and then dragging the body out of the hole himself, continued the digging. This, I believe, is really true, just as I have told it. That kind of newspaper coverage was not exactly an encouraging hint to take the trek to California and try your luck. In the same month, the Waterford Independent published this ad for a scheme to finance passage abroad for want-to-be miners. You paid £1 to enter a lottery. The first round of winners were given a boat ticket, food, implements, and money. Once in America, these men were obligated to make repayments to a local agent. The funds went back to Ireland to pay for the next wave of lottery winners. I couldn't find any information that this was or wasn't a legitimate scheme, or how many men may have benefited from it. 7 months later, this piece appeared in the Dublin Weekly Register, and I'm going to quote here, "It is madness in a man who cannot sleep out under a tree, eat the hardest of fare, and endure great fatigue to turn a working gold miner." Other than the paid passage scheme that we just talked about, how did the Irish get to the gold rush? Interestingly, most did not come straight from Ireland, only 11% did. 45% came from elsewhere in the United States. This tells us that they had an opportunity to become acquainted with American culture, social customs, and laws before heading out west. Some had even become citizens of the United States. Interestingly, 44% came from Australasia, meaning Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Islands. It's likely that these Irish had been sentenced to transportation to these places for alleged crimes committed in Ireland. For the 45% of Irish who came to California from elsewhere in the U.S., how did they travel there? Well, there were three basic choices: sailing around the Horn, traveling overland, and coming by way of the Isthmus of Panama. Sailing around the Horn, the distance was 15,000 miles and the duration was 4 to 8 months. There were many hazards with this route. You could sink, you could shipwreck, there was illness on board, such as typhoid, cholera. There were mutinies. You could be becalmed and sit for days, weeks, months without moving and running out of provisions. Another way to get to the gold fields was to take the overland route. This was only 3,000 miles long and took 3 to 7 months. This was the shortest of the three in time and distance. The hazards that could be encountered were sunstroke, frostbite, dust storms, Native American Indian attacks, losing the trail, rattlesnake bite, starvation, and dehydration. And lastly, people could travel via Panama. This was a combination of sailing and overland travel. This was 7,000 miles on average and 2 to 3 months in duration. You would sail down the east coast of the United States and then disembark at the Isthmus of Panama. You would cross overland to the western side and pick up another boat to sail up the coast to California. The hazards there were combined all of the ones previously mentioned, plus the added attraction of tropical diseases and being stranded on either side of the isthmus if you missed a connection. And then lastly, the third option was to go via Panama. This combined both sailing and overland travel. It took 7,000 miles and on average 2 to 3 months. You would sail down the eastern coast of the United States, disembarking at the Isthmus of Panama. Then you would cross overland to the western side. There you would pick up another boat to sail up to California. The hazards on this trip included all of the ones previously mentioned, plus the added attraction of tropical diseases and being stranded on either side of the isthmus after missing a connection. So how did people afford the trip? Some families pooled resources to send one male relative to strike it rich and then come back home and share the proceeds. A young man could hire himself out to work his passage either on board a ship or with a wagon train. I read about one man who didn't have cash for the fare, so he struck a bargain with a local merchant. In exchange for the price of the fare, he promised to bring a load of the merchant's shovels and pickaxe heads to San Francisco. There the man would attach handles and sell them for a large profit. He promised to return with the money when he came back home to get his wife and child, and he did. Once the Irish got to California, how did they fare? Were they accepted? How well did they assimilate? Was their experience different from other ethnic groups? The environment in California during the gold rush period was favorable for the Irish. The timeline shown previously reminds us that at that time California was in its infancy as an American possession. It was still forming its own cultural identity. The entrenched anti-Irish attitudes of the East Coast were not present. There was no Protestant establishment. Those attitudes are best exemplified by this ad from a New York newspaper with the well-known phrase, "Irish need not apply." This is not to say that the Irish did not endure any prejudice at the goldfields. Some say that the phrase "luck of the Irish" was started in the gold rush period and is rooted in a negative view of Irishmen as lazy and ignorant. It implies that the Irish could not possibly have struck it rich through hard labor or intelligence, but only by dumb luck. This slide lists some reasons why the Irish were able to assimilate at the gold mines as well as in California in general because they were not so obviously foreign. And I think the quote at the bottom of the slide, which reads, "It is a disgrace to any legislature to place such specimens of humanity as Chinamen on an equality with white people of intelligent countries from whose blood ours flow." This came out of the Wairika Journal from Wairika, California, December 4th, 1861. And I think that it's illustrating the fact that Caucasian people were at much more of an advantage over other ethnic groups. And the fact that he points out white people of intelligent countries from whose blood ours flow could be construed to also include the Irish. Being white and English speaking gave them a certain invisibility. They also did not attract much negative attention because they did not comprise that big of a group amongst the miners. And you can see that in Siskiyou County, for instance, out of a population of 2,240, only 91 were Irish born. That's only 4%. And in 1850, California had 2,452 Irish and over 4,000 Chinese. There was a feeling amongst Americans that since gold was discovered on American soil, it belonged to Americans. Some also feared that riches found by foreigners would be sent home to finance an attempt to wrestle California away from the U.S. Remember that there were only a few years prior, the land belonged to Mexico. Could they wage a war to win it back with the Chinese? The Irish, on the other hand, had no government to finance for such a scheme. England was the enemy. The foreign miners tax. This was instituted by the California state government as an attempt to keep American gold for Americans. A license was required for all foreigners who wished to mine gold. The fees were hefty, up to $20 a month at one point. Officials mainly targeted the Chinese. This tax was profitable. In Siskiyou County, California, near the Oregon border, the collections jumped from $100 to $11,973 a year in the span of 12 years. And here you can see an actual miner's license that was made out to somebody of a German extraction. The Irish, as quoted at the bottom of the slide, were probably the immigrant community with the lowest rate of return immigration in California. the famine was still very much present in Ireland, and for many people who came to the United States, emigration was not voluntary. It was the only way to escape certain death through starvation and disease. So the Irish had to assimilate. They knew that they were probably not going to go back home, and that gave them the stimulus to succeed, and was something that was not experienced by other ethnic groups at the gold mines at the time. Recall that the Irish were British citizens, subjects to the crown. It may have been fairly easy to renounce that and become American citizens. They could assimilate without giving up their emotional attachment to home. The interest in Irish politics was strong in the gold fields. Several of the fraternal organizations, such as the Ancient Order of Hibernians and the Fenians, were active there. And rather than receiving a negative backlash from Anglo-Americans for retaining a sense of nationalism, they appear to have been admired for it. These excerpts come from Irish American newspapers, and I think that they serve well as examples of the desire on the part of the Irish to become American while holding on to their Irish culture. This is the gravestone for my 3 times great-grandfather, Owen Murray. It's in a cemetery near Callahan in Siskiyou County, California. It lists his place of birth as County Louth, Ireland. And in looking at other graves in the 2 Catholic cemeteries in Siskiyou County, I found more stones with Irish birthplaces listed, and all of them were for people who were born between 1813 and 1834. They all likely escaped the Irish famine, eventually settling in gold country. But these people never gave up a feeling for home, as evidenced by writing their county of birth on their headstones. And I found that to be a rather poignant reminder that, yet again, they just did not give up their feelings for home and their culture. It seems that the Irish were able to practice their religion without too many dangerous repercussions in the gold country. They were able to build churches, celebrate the sacraments, and um, celebrate their Catholicism without much hindrance. This may have been partly due to the fact that, as mentioned before, the Protestant ethos had not taken hold yet in California. And actually, the Mexican residents before them would have also been Catholic, and perhaps the religion wasn't as stigmatized in the West because of that. It seems that the Irish were able to practice their religion freely out in the gold country. I think this is an example of the level at which they had assimilated and were accepted. The fact that they could celebrate their sacraments, have mass, and actually have priests and nuns come up to the gold fields to preach. In 1855, there was enough of a need in little Siskiyou County, Northern California, for the Vatican to send 2 Dublin priests to tend to the Catholics in the area. In Callahan and Sawyer's Bar, which are in Siskiyou County, Mass was said for the town people and the miners in a private home until later that year um, a Catholic church could be built. That church is still standing, although Mass is not said in it, and it is the oldest Catholic church in Northern California. In talking about how the Irish were able to assimilate so well and flourish during the gold rush, we should take a look at some of the Irish success stories. What I did was I picked out some people who had Irish roots and who had come to California because of the gold rush and made a success of it. Our first person is Catherine Kate Hayes. She was known as the Swan of Erin. Born in 1818 in Limerick, she became a famous international entertainer singer. She came to San Francisco in 1852 and sang at the American Theater and was a huge success. P.T. Barnum sponsored her tour of the California gold fields in 1853. She went out there to entertain the gold miners. Grass Valley, California has a Kate Hayes Flat, a Kate Hayes Hill, and the Kate Hayes Mining Company. Next is James Phelan Jr., born 1821 in Queens County, now known as County Leash. At 6, he joined his father and brothers living in New York City. But as a 28-year-old man in 1849, he responded to the news of the gold rush by heading to San Francisco with 3 loads of mining supplies. And within a year, he cleared $100,000 in profit. This is known as mining the miners, people who did not actually mine themselves, but made a fortune in selling products and services to the miners. He invested in San Francisco real estate, established the first National Bank of San Francisco, and in 1871 he opened San Francisco's first modern office building. The Phelan Building still stands today, and he died leaving an estate worth more than $11 million. And here we have Lola Montez. Did you know that she was actually Irish? I didn't until I started doing this research. Her real name was Eliza Rosanna Gilbert, and she was born in 1821 in County Sligo. She arrived in San Francisco in 1853 with already quite a reputation. She had been singing throughout Europe and entertaining many stages of society. She was infamous for having had 3 marriages, had been brought to trial for bigamy, and was purportedly a lover of the King of Bavaria and Franz Liszt. At San Francisco's American Theater, she performed her scandalous spider dance, which was a dance that starts off with her slowly dancing around the stage. She glances down and notices a spider on the bottom of her skirt, and she kicks at it and then notices more spiders and begins to kick frantically, exposing a lot of leg and underclothing. So you can imagine that this was quite a hit with the miners up in the mining camps. In Grass Valley, she bought a home and she maintained a salon for visiting theater folk there. It was there she also met and coached a young neighbor named Lode Crabtree, who also went on to become a famous entertainer singer. 2 lakes in Nevada County are named after her. Thomas Hayes was born in County Clare, and he sailed from New York to California in 1849 with a large quantity of merchandise. He sold this merchandise to miners at a great profit, and this was known as mining the miners. So people made their fortunes either actually digging for gold or relieving the miners of whatever profits they actually had made. With his proceeds, he bought San Francisco real estate, and Hayes Valley and Hayes Street in San Francisco are named after him. He designed Van Ness Avenue, a major artery through San Francisco, and served the city government in many capacities. John Sullivan. He was born in 1824 in Limerick, and he arrived in San Francisco in 1844, so before the onset of the gold rush. He left the city in 1848 to go to Tuolumne County, where he made a fortune, also selling goods to miners. He returned to San Francisco, where he became one of the founders and first president of Hibernia Savings and Loan. The bank helped immigrants with loans to buy land and homes. He donated the land for Old St. Mary's Church at the corner of California and Grant Streets in San Francisco. His first wife is buried under the altar. Samuel Brannan. Now, he did not come directly from Ireland. He was actually the son of Irish immigrants from Maine. But I'm putting him in here because he's a quite well-known character. He brought his own printing press when he came to San Francisco, and he's credited with starting the first San Francisco newspaper called the California Star. He's also purported to being the first to publish news of the gold rush. He had several mining town stores, and with the profits he earned from those, he bought tracts of land in San Francisco. Brannan Street is named for him, and interestingly enough, he also founded the town of Calistoga. Though he is known as the first gold rush millionaire, he actually died in poverty, having had suffered from alcoholism and a propensity for romantic entanglements. Our last person is John Downey. He was born in 1827 in Roscommon and was a druggist by profession. He followed the gold rush to California and ended up prospecting in Grass Valley, one of the few people I found who actually was a miner. He eventually became California's first foreign-born governor, and his popularity and success at the polls was partly due to the fact that he had created so many relationships within mining communities in Northern California. He was active in labor matters for the miners. So Irish 49ers did have success in assimilating into their new communities, more so than other ethnic groups. Although there was a strident anti-foreigner attitude in California and at the gold mines at this time, the Irish escaped the worst of the prejudice. They were white. They spoke English. Many had the benefit of having lived in the U.S. before coming to California, learning about American customs and laws. The Irish were determined to succeed because going back to Ireland was not an option with the famine ravaging their home country. The East Coast Protestant ethos had not yet taken hold in California, so they were free to express their culture, celebrating St. Patrick's Day and Catholic Mass. Anti-Irish sentiments did increase in California in the decades after the gold rush, but they never reached the levels that we're seeing in the eastern United States, the Irish need not apply, being the most common symbol of that. So that's the end of this presentation. If you have any questions or comments, you can contact me at the email on the last slide. Thank you very much, and hope to have you come back to our channel to see other presentations. Thank you.